In the early 17th century, England was governed by a monarchy. The monarch would often call parliaments to assist in the running of the country, but this was at their discretion.
Following the death of James I in 1625, his son Charles became King of England. He was a strong believer in the divine right of kings, that his power had been ordained by God, and often saw Parliament as superfluous, preferring to rule with his personal advisers of the Privy Council.
In 1629, he decided to remove Parliament entirely, leading to 11 years of personal rule, where he levied controversial forms of taxation such as ship money, supported by his Privy Council.
However, by 1640, Charles was bankrupt and was forced to call parliaments to try to gain parliamentary subsidies. But when it reconvened, Parliament were angry and demanded restrictions on the power of the monarchy. At this stage, Parliament still saw the monarchy as the best form of government. They felt that Charles had been led astray by his evil advisers. However, Charles refused to negotiate, and war broke out in 1642, lasting for 4 years.
Charles and the Royalists were defeated in the war by the Parliamentary Roundheads, but Charles refused to negotiate reductions to his powers and tried to go to war again. Once again, he is defeated.
Parliament decide that a negotiated settlement with the king cannot be reached, and so he is executed in 1649. Following his execution, the monarchy and the Privy Council are abolished, and a Commonwealth is established as the form of government in England.
Russia had been controlled by an autocratic regime, with Tsar Nicholas II at its head. This state centralised power in the hands of one man with an aristocratic backing.
The First World War was disastrous for Russia, the failure of the regime to provide basic goods such as food. This added to previous unhappiness of a lack of representation. A largely peaceful resolution led to the rise of the moderate left-wing provisional government.
The failure of the provisional government to provide the reforms it promised led to a Bolshevik seizure of power led by Lenin, with the idea that the state should control everything in this new communist nation.
The supporters of both the provisional governments and the Tsars, along with the former Allied nations, teamed up to form the Whites. They attempted to defeat the Reds and seize state power, but their disorganised efforts failed to defeat the much better organised Soviet enemy.
The Soviets undertook state building in the chaos of the Civil War. They centralised power and took over various services. They were supposed to represent a state controlled by the proletariat. Instead, a new authoritarian state was produced, greatly influenced by the Civil War. Russia had seen free transfers of state power, as the size battle controlled the state by arguing they best represented the interests of the Russian people.
Somalia gained its independence from Britain and Italy in 1960. In 1969, General Said Barre led the Somali army to Mogadishu and orchestrated a military coup. He led a socialist dictatorship under the new name of the Somali Democratic Republic. As Barre began to age and decline in health, speculation and uncertainty grew over who would be his successor. He implemented increasingly autocratic and erratic policies, becoming more totalitarian. As a result, resistance movements formed across the country with the aim of seizing state power.
In 1991, the United Somali Congress, or USC, attacked and defeated the regime's forces. However, the USC failed to agree a political settlement, and this left a power vacuum, with many different factions competing for influence.
This led to conflict between the different clan factions, segregating Somalia into a state of warlordism. Later, in 1991, the Somali National Movement took control of the north, declaring it Somaliland, and the USC took over the south, with their leader, Ali Mahdi Mohammed, being recognised internationally as the President of Somalia. Despite this, he could not maintain stable central authority. Following thousands of civilian deaths from war, disease and starvation, the UN approved a USA peacekeeping intervention to distribute food and supplies, essentially assuming the role of nation building.
In 1993, the Battle of Mogadishu is fought between the USA and the SNA rebel faction. Somalia is increasingly characterised internationally as a failed state. By 1995, the USA and UN had both withdrawn, but conflict between warlords continued. No government emerged to take control of the state. Between 2000 and 2006, 14 attempts at forming a government are made. Transitional national government remains a power until 2006, when it is exiled in neighbouring Kenya.
Later, in 2006, Islamic Courts Union seized southern Somalia. Al-Shabaab, allies with Al-Qaeda, then takes over southern Somalia. There is a Kenyan intervention in 2011 in an attempt to remove Al-Shabaab from majority control in the south.
The Kenyan Al-Shabaab conflict has dominated the events of the Somalian Civil War from 2011 to the present. Somalia is still a fragile state and has been in the top 3 of the Fragile States Index for the last 9 years. This is because no faction is stable enough to successfully complete a state-building effort and warlords are too concerned with the volatility of their own territories to be able to control a nation.
President Assad was ruling a family dictatorship in Syria. The Middle East was rocked by the Arab Spring, as protesters called for democracy. They were met with violence, which further escalated protests.
The protesters started taking up arms and developed into the Free Syrian Army, a Western-backed group that lacked tangible political power. They presented a rival version of the state in an attempt to seize power.
The vacuum of power led to the emergence of the Islamic State, or IS. Other splinter groups emerged, with various ideologies. Some became more radical than others, but all were the enemy of IS.
America began bombing IS in Syria, but not Assad's regime, despite him crossing Obama's imposed red line, the use of chemical weapons. Britain then followed a similar policy. Russia also subsequently intervened, exerting its great power status, but on the side of Assad.
This had created a very confused situation in Syria, with different powers controlling different parts. A stalemate has emerged, with different ruling factions questioning which is the true state, or are there multiple states?